welcome. Thank you all for attending, both in person and online. I think we have 300 people registered to attend, and I think they're filtering in right now. We started planning this meeting several months ago, thanks to DEQ for helping to plan it, especially Andrea, Holly, and Helena, and also to the Coastal Studies Institute for hosting. We are looking to have essentially a one-stop shop for people to ask questions. We have the National Park Service, we have Coastal Studies Institute, Dare County representatives, DEQ, Division of Coastal Management, North Carolina Emergency Management, flood insurance specialists, and I think about 30 others online who should be able to answer some questions if we can't up here. With that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Reed Corbett. Reed is the Executive Director of the Coastal Studies Institute and the Dean of East Carolina University's Integrated Coastal Programs. He has a PhD in oceanography and was born and raised in coastal North Carolina. Reed spends a large portion of his day thinking about and studying the issues we are discussing today, so we're thankful to have his support and guidance.
Thanks, Bart. So welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Coastal Studies Institute, and appreciate the time it takes to get here, as well as everybody that's online. Thank you for coming. I'm going to try to keep us on track and on schedule as best I can. This isn't going to work until people stop flooding in, and so I apologize for those that are in the room. Since we are streaming this live on Zoom, this is going to have to stay up until people stop trickling in. And so one of the things I think we all recognize is we're going to be dealing with a fairly complex challenge that we are facing here on the Outer Banks, across North Carolina, and the fact is across all coastal communities. And so we want to get as much information to you as we can in a fairly short period of time, and then provide you plenty of opportunity for questions at the end. And so we are going to go through several speakers to try and get you information about the science, about insurance, about the park, and some other things that are being done. And there'll be plenty of time towards the end of our meeting this evening for questions. This is going to drive me crazy with this here. Again, thank you for those that are in the room. Thank you for those that are online. What we are going to try to do in order to manage the number of people we will have online and in the room is again, try to hold your questions towards the end till we have the panel. You'll have all the experienced and experts up here that you can ask as many questions as you like. Those of you that are in the room, because we are recording this will be on Dare County's current TV. It'll be on Dare County's YouTube channel, so anybody can follow up on all the information. But those of you that are in the room that want to ask a question, we're going to have somebody with a mic that'll be running around giving you the opportunity to ask that question. But we want everybody to be able to hear it online in the recording, so we're going to ask you to use a mic. Those of you that are coming in online, you'll note that you are muted. You'll also note that you probably can't unmute. Because of the sheer number of people we're expecting online, our account limits the number of people to 300, and we capped out at 300 this afternoon. And so if they all show up, it's going to be a very large group, and so we couldn't have everybody just unmuting whenever they wanted. So use the chat. You should have availability on the chat. Ask your questions as we go along. We'll try to get to every one of those questions. And so use that chat for asking your questions, and we appreciate, again, we appreciate the idea of how we're trying to allow this to flow, and want to keep it moving forward as best we can. Tonight's agenda, again, we're going to try to get you out of here before 8, but we'll stay as long as you're interested as far as answering questions within reason. But this is sort of what our agenda is for the evening. Again, we want to get you some of the information, sort of understanding the problem. Many of you do understand the problem, living the problem today, but again, we're going to start fairly large scope to look at the problem, look at the processes driving it, look at some of what the government agencies are doing and have done in the recent past as far as developing some white papers and other things that are ongoing. We'll look at what some of the options are. We'll look at how we can sort of talk to somebody that actually focuses on flood insurance, and maybe what you could do now as a homeowner. And then we'll, again, get a lot of the speakers as well as a few others up here for a panel for any questions. All right, so with that, what I want to do is present you with some of the science, some of the drivers of the processes creating some of the challenges that we're currently facing and the reason we're all sitting in the room today. One of the main reasons we're here really is, well, one of it's information gathering, but another thing is that Dare County is trying to apply for some federal funds. And so I'll sort of start this with the idea that Dare County, and one of the reasons we're all here is Dare County is trying to apply for some funds to help at-risk homeowners. This is a voluntary interest form. It does not commit the homeowner to anything. You can back out of this at any time. You're going to hear more from Barton about this. It's a voluntary form, but it is an opportunity for homeowners with at-risk homes to get involved in the opportunity for funds that could ultimately buy out that house. And so that's something to recognize, voluntary form. Barton will give you more information about that. All right, so for me this evening, what I'm trying to do is give you some scope of the challenges. In 2 slides, I'm going to go through the geologic evolution of barrier islands. 2 slides, I'm going to do this. So sort of the idea that the past is a window into the future. So understanding the past here in North Carolina is critical for us to understand some of the challenges that are taking place, not just now, but certainly looking forward. I want to look at some of the modern processes, what is driving some of the changes that we see in our coastal system, and you can apply this very broadly if you'd like. And then some of the implications of those processes. Some of those we saw this week, but I'll sort of expand that beyond just homes. We know here in North Carolina that change is not a new concept, right? I mean, we have seen plenty of change. And in fact, you can see change just since maps have been drawn across North Carolina. This is one of the first maps that we have, 1733, the Moseley map. And if you just look at some of the maps from this 1733 to 1833, I mean, our coastline has changed for a long period of time, right? And that's documented through people's own eyes, how they've put those down in these maps. But this change isn't just since we've been able to document this since here in 1733. If we go back sort of in geologic time, one of the drivers of change is these changes in climate, which is driving changes in sea level. And so this is a quick reference to climate over the last million years in the past, present. And these wiggles are essentially giving you global climate change, right? It's looking at temperatures globally and how they have varied through time between warmer periods versus colder periods. Warmer periods referenced as interglacial, colder periods referenced as glacial periods, right? Cold versus warm. And what we've seen through geologic time is this back and forth swinging of the planet between these glacial and interglacial periods. And in fact, during the last glacial period, just about 20,000 years ago, we actually had a very large ice sheet over most of North America, down as far as New Jersey. And at New Jersey, you actually had a mile-thick pile of ice sitting over North America. In the last 20,000 years, clearly that has retreated. But you can imagine, as we move between these cold and warm climates, taking a lot of water from the ocean, piling up large ice sheets, right, removing water from the ocean, versus going into these interglacial periods, taking that ice, melting it, and putting it in the ocean. And so we've had significant variations in climate, which has led to significant variations in sea level. North Carolina coast, you should recognize it. The colors represent elevation, right? Elevation changes. The red indicating lower elevation, the greens indicating higher elevation. And on the left, what you have is various graphs showing the last 150,000 years. The top graph is CO2 in the atmosphere. That data is gathered from deep ice cores collected in the extreme northern and extreme southern latitudes. The middle one is showing global average temperature, and the lower one is showing average sea level. And from this, you get an idea of how sea level has varied through time. Again, the last 150,000 years. Remember from that last, we had these extreme variations in temperature. With temperature, you see extreme variations in sea level. From the last interglacial, the last glacial to present. And in fact, when you sort of map this across our coastline, during this last interglacial, this is what our shoreline was. This is referred to today as the Suffolk Scarp, right? It's an old beach shoreline, old paleo shoreline. And that's roughly 25 feet above sea level today. During the last glacial max, when a lot of the ocean's water was trapped in ice sheets, this represents our shoreline. Right? That's just beyond the continental break today, the shelf break today. So we've had extreme variations in shoreline through time. This is just the last 150,000 years, which sounds like a long time for us. But geologically, that is a blip in time. And this is what shaped a lot of our coast over that geologic time. But keeping this in the back of your mind, the dynamics of our system, not just those maps I showed you from 733 to present, 1733 to present, but over geologic time, the shaping of our coast due to these large variations in sea level. Today, processes driving these same changes, these are things there was plenty of data collected that demonstrate major changes in global temperatures, right? The rising in global temperatures over the last 100, 120 years or so. That rise in global temperature isn't the same everywhere, and that's what this upper map is showing you, is temperatures are going up, increasing faster in some places than others. That's leading to a warmer ocean. In fact, the surface ocean today is about 1 degree Celsius warmer than it was just 50 years ago, leading to significant melting. This is the same location, different time frame, 2004 versus 41, right? So significant melting. Both of these are leading to significant sea level rise. And I'll spend some time talking about sea level. It may seem sort of distant from some of the challenges that we're facing on the shore today, but these are all related, and it will come back around. And so if we think about coastal North Carolina, we have to think about the total vulnerability, the drivers of that vulnerability. All right, this is driving me crazy. And it's not just one thing that drives the vulnerability in North Carolina. It's a culmination of many, and they're all happening at the same time. And so we can't just point to one thing or the other, but all of these are working in conjunction with another, leading to the vulnerability that we see today. And I'll talk about some of these individually, but the idea of storms, and again, this is easy to map the name storms. It's harder to map the low pressure systems like we just had, the nor'easters that we have throughout the winter. Those are often more damaging, and many of you know this, than a named storm. Our low and very extensive, certainly in the Northeast, right, very low lying. The underlying geology is also, for at least the Northeast, is also subsiding. We are slowly sinking, right, which leads to challenges, more challenges when it comes to what sea level is doing, locally and globally. So all of these things sort of play together to put us in the situation that we are in today. So thinking about storms, the idea of storms is nothing new for the Outer Banks. We've always experienced storms. But across North Carolina, and particularly in eastern North Carolina, we are seeing an increase in the number of storms. The intensity of storms we could talk back and forth about, but certainly we're seeing storms that have a lot more rain, a lot more incident rain during the time of those storms. And when you look at, I'm not getting into the actual lines. The lines refer to the money, right? The cost of these storms. But if you just look at the colors and the bars, this is referencing the number of events, not just the number of events, the number of events that cost at least $1 billion. Right? So these are major events that are occurring. It's not looking at some of the smaller events. And what you see is certainly through time, this is starting in about 1980, we're seeing those number of events. This is for North Carolina. It's not just for the East Coast. But if you look at the colors, what most of these storms, these billion-dollar storms are referencing, tropical cyclones, severe storm count, and flooding, right? It's not all of them, but that is majority of what you're seeing there. An increased incidence in storms just in the last decade. I've mentioned sea level. It'll come up again. It is going to be a driver of change in eastern North Carolina. There is no doubt about it. For North Carolina, what this is showing, this is just showing northeast North Carolina, the two tide gauges we have on the Outer Banks. One is in Duck, North Carolina, the other is in Oregon Inlet. And you can see that the rate of sea level rise, although hard to sort of put together the idea of 5 millimeters a year, 5.5 millimeters per year, hard to sort of put that together, you know, the thickness of a nickel or so, a little bit more every year. And so if you put that in a bit more perspective, roughly 1.6 to 1.8 feet per year if you use this rate. 1.6 to 1.8 feet per year, or per 100 years, sorry, per 100 years. Again, that's using this linear rate. And that's important to recognize. This is based on data. This is based on the tide gauges that we have at these two locations. Now, it's important to recognize that this is something that North Carolina is focused on. This is a 2024 report. This would be the third report that North Carolina has put out on sea level. This is available online. I encourage you, if you're interested in sea level, the implications of sea level rise in North Carolina, I encourage you to have a look at it. I'll give you a quick summary of this report put out in 2024. The graph is showing you Duck in the top graph versus Wilmington in the lower graph. For North Carolina, we have to recognize that sea level rise, relative sea level rise, so what it's doing here versus Atlantic Beach versus Wilmington is different. And that's because not that the oceans are changing differently, it's that the land is changing differently. Land in northeast North Carolina is sinking slowly, where in Wilmington it's pretty stationary, right? So we actually have to account for what the land is doing. We, here in northeast North Carolina, we have a significant influence from the Gulf Stream as well. And so changes in the strength of the Gulf Stream will also influence what local sea level is doing. And so it is different between us, Wilmington, and that's something to recognize. And so we want to look at what your tide gauges are doing, what the projections for your area is going to do. Now, interestingly, when we look into the not too distant future, we look over the next 10, 15, 20 years, it doesn't really matter if you're in Wilmington or Duck, because what's going to happen is relatively the same. And the projections put out by NOAA, based on models, but whether you just extrapolate the current tide gauges or you use the models which are predicting and demonstrating an increase in that rate through time, we should expect a 1-foot rise in sea level by 2050. Now that's relative to 2000. Right? So between 2000 and 2050, we will see a 1-foot rise in sea level. We've already seen half of that already. The next half is coming between now and 2050. To put that into perspective, it took the previous 100 years to reach a 1-foot rise in sea level. And so the rate of sea level today is at least double what it was in the previous 100 years. And so that rate is increasing. This leads to this projection when you take it out further than 2050. Again, looking at 2050, there's very little wiggle room between that 1 foot. 1 foot is probably the minimum, as high as 1.4 feet by 2050. When you project that out further, there's a lot more error in what it might be at 2100. But given where we are today, given the trajectory that we are on today, we're not expecting it to be any lower, right? So that 1 to 1.5 feet is certainly what we should expect, and it's not going to slow down after 2050, given our trajectory. So these are things that we really need to put in place in our planning. This is something that we can include in planning today. This is happening, and certainly we can plan out to 2050 without much error at all. All right, so if we sort of think through that, the idea of storms, the idea of sea level rise, low-lying area, do we have examples of how these processes are sort of influencing our coastal system today? Certainly we saw some of that on Tuesday through the idea of erosion. Erosion is not just a product of sea level rise, and many of you know that. It's not that it's not a product of that either, right? The idea of a 1 foot rise in sea level certainly is going to encroach on the shore. The shore will move inland. But we have seen, erosion and high erosion rates in certain areas of our coast for decades. For as long as we've been measuring shoreline erosion, we have seen erosion rates on the order of 5 to 10 feet per year, some places higher than 10 feet per year. And in fact, if you look at Division of Coastal Management, they have a website that gives you erosion rates that they've measured. What's still online today are 3 different erosion rates, 3 different time periods, 2000-ish, 2007, and 2018-ish, something like that. 3 different time periods you can actually look at the erosion rates. It's all from the same baseline, 1946. It looks at shorelines, looks at the difference of those shorelines, difference in time, gives you a rate of change. The red is an indication of where it's eroding. The green is an indication of where it's either 0 or above 0. It's accreting, right? It's growing. You can see along the Outer Banks, we are dominated by erosion. 90% of the area is eroding. Not a big surprise, but right? I mean, you can sort of see it there. At least it puts it into perspective, the amount of area that we are seeing eroding. On average, across the Outer Banks, we're looking at about 5 feet per year, but there are areas like Rodanthe, like Buxton, that have rates of erosion as high as 13 plus feet per year. Right? That's a real challenge. This is sort of one of the earlier trouble spots. This is South Nags Head, showing you different shorelines, right? The red spots, the red shapes there where previous houses were. This is the challenge that we are faced with, that we are continuing to be faced with. It's not a new problem for Dare County. But it's not just about that eroding shoreline. There's other things that are also happening associated with some of these processes I talked about. The idea of a rising water table. More rain, higher sea levels leads to a higher water table. And what that means is when we have rain events, we will find more standing water because the water doesn't have any place to go. This is an event, 2018 rain that Roanoke Island had about just over 15 inches, I think, over 5 days, which led to some significant flooding. We're seeing more challenges with outfalls. I mean, the fact is, as sea level continues to rise, yes, water runs downhill, but if the water rises, the steepness from where that water is running, the gradient's just not there anymore, which is creating some challenges for getting rid of that water. And certainly looking at loss of wetlands. Some of that is due to loss of protection of those wetlands. Some of it is the transition of those wetlands as well, right? Through erosion, through processes associated with sea level rise. I think one thing we aren't often thinking about is with that water table coming up, majority of our Outer Banks, majority of a lot of Eastern North Carolina for that matter, is on-site wastewater, septic systems, right? This is how we treat most of our waste coming out of our houses. Not everybody, but many people are on-site wastewater. This is a real challenge as water begins to rise because this process is dependent on about a 1 to 3 foot, what's referred to as the vadose zone, an area where there's air in between the soils before you actually get to the groundwater. What you need is about 3 feet in order to cleanse that water, treat that water before it gets into the groundwater. As water tables rise, you just don't have that 3 foot needed for treating the water prior to it going into the groundwater. So water quality issues, environmental health issues are another challenge with a rising water table. So that's a lot of process. It's a lot of actual events that are taking place today. And so where do we go from here, right? The idea and why many of you are here. And I don't think I'm going to surprise you with any of this, right? I mean, I don't think there's going to be much of a surprise in what you think we can do versus what I really think we can do. The one you can't see is don't do anything. In some cases, that's currently what we're doing, right? It's not the solution. But this was put out by the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, as ways that we can sort of manage, or different things we can do to try and manage the changes that are taking place in coastal systems. Some of those we are actually doing today, right? The idea of protect. And depending on people's viewpoint, protect versus this idea of ecosystem-based adaptation, different people put beach nourishment into either one of those. I see it more as protect than ecosystem-based adaptation, personally. But again, you see it presented differently. But this is a way of managing some of the change associated with shoreline erosion that's being driven by multiple processes, energy in the system, sea level rise. Accommodate, right? A great example of accommodation is the Jug Handle Bridge. And the idea of destruct or move, and I don't mean destruct as in destruction, although we have just seen that, but the idea of potentially doing this on our own as well is making the choice to do that, or making the choice to move the home. And we're seeing more of that today. This is where the challenge begins, is how we sort of manage some of these changes. What do we do to address the changes that are taking place? We actually have a pretty good handle on the science and understand the drivers of the change. But as a community, we really need to make some decisions on how we are going to address that from a community's perspective. And so I appreciate people coming, listening to the science behind some of this to get to the real sort of challenging part is what we do to address some of these. And it's not that we aren't doing anything. There have been some efforts in the last many months, a couple years, to try and address some of the challenges that we have faced here in Dare County. We've had many visits from some of our state as well as federal leaders. One of the things, just to point to one, is a bill that Senator Murphy put forward to try and sort of deal with some of the insurance issues, right? The idea that insurance isn't going to pay out until the house falls. I'm not saying that bill's going anywhere. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But that was an example of trying to take some of the information that was given to one of our state leaders and seeing if there was something that could be done about it. It's one example. Another example is something that Dave Halleck was a part of, and sort of that working group that was trying to consider different ways of managing the at-risk oceanfront, and put together a couple examples based on other states, examples from other states. And so there are things that we are trying to do. There are things that our county, our park, our state leaders are trying to do to consider how we move forward in some of these at-risk homes. So with that, I'm going to introduce Dave Halleck. Dave is the superintendent of the National Parks of Eastern North Carolina, including the Cape Hatteras National Seashore. I can certainly attest to this. Dave's an avid advocate for preserving our coastal resources, enjoying the recreation opportunities they have to offer. Comes to the job with a master's degree in wildlife and fisheries biology, and is going to talk today about the outcomes of this work group, as well as some other interesting topics, and maybe how that work group can help address some of this. So Dave, I'll leave it to you. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Can you hear me okay? Thank you, Reed. Pleasure to be with all of you this evening. Thanks for taking the time to come and learn more about this topic. It's a serious topic. I have the pleasure of managing Cape Hatteras National Seashore. This is the first national seashore in the United States of America. It's about 80 miles long. It's incredible. People come from all over the world to see it, to relax, to retire, to spend time with their families. It's important to all Americans. And the threatened oceanfront structures issue has become one of the challenges, given that many of these structures are next to or right up against or sometimes on top of Cape Hatteras seashore beaches. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about the problem and then give you a quick overview of the Threatened Oceanfront Structures Working Group report that we worked on with the Division of Coastal Management in the state of North Carolina here. I do want to thank the state of North Carolina and Dare County for hosting this meeting. There are no silver bullets to this issue. We're not going to hear about all the solutions tonight. If this was an easy problem to solve, somebody would have solved it a long time ago. This is a problem that states are dealing with from Maine to Florida, Gulf of Mexico, California, and beyond. So it's something we have to work on together and slowly find new solutions for. So some of these slides are a little bit of a repeat of what Reed did, but I just want to stress the fact that these problems are coming from processes that have occurred for a long, long period of time. All of these greenish or yellow lines on the map are shorelines, historic shorelines. And I want to point out the shoreline all the way on the right side of the image here. Reed also showed this. This is from the 1850s. That's not that long ago, actually. And these other shorelines here are from the 1940s and beyond. Reed had mentioned that the state of North Carolina has erosion rates published for different time periods. We've done the same thing to update some of those rates. So we've looked at the shorelines between 1998 and 2025, and we use that information to develop shoreline change rates. And in most cases, other than the few greenish spots on the last map, we're finding that, not surprisingly, the shorelines are generally eroding everywhere. This is Buxton, North Carolina. If you're familiar with Buxton, up at the top there is the Fessenden Center. I happened to give this a similar presentation just a few weeks ago related to Dare County's proposal to repair a groin there. And I just wanted to point out, even there, we have some very, very quick rates of erosion. They do approach more than 10 or even 15 feet per year. That doesn't mean that every single year, 10 feet of shoreline is absolutely going to erode. There may be some years where it's less. There may be some years where it's more. But over the long term, we are seeing significant erosion. I also want to point out that it's not always just the width of the beach that affects the threatened oceanfront structures. Certainly, some of my friends here in the front row watched what happened following swells from Hurricane Erin, where we didn't just see the beach erode, we also saw a significant amount of vertical erosion. That vertical erosion can happen extremely quickly, like 5-6 feet overnight. And that's a major issue for beach homes that are on pilings, because one of the reasons those homes are standing upright is because those pilings are deep in the sand. That embedment is what is holding them up. So when you lose 5 feet of sand supporting those pilings, it can make them much more vulnerable to collapse. Okay, I also want to just stress this. This is a paper from the journal Marine Geology, and you're probably saying, why is he showing us this? Okay, in the year this was published, 1968, before the terminal groin on the north end of Hatteras Island was built, before there was any significant dredging of the Oregon Inlet, these folks studied erosion from 1852 to 1962 by looking at all these shorelines. You notice during the time periods they looked at that sometimes they saw the beach accrete, but overall there was a significant net change showing erosion or loss. And this is in the Buxton Cape Point area, really Cape Hatteras. But when I say significant, I'm talking about 1,750 feet of beach that's gone, 2,000 feet, 200 feet of beach that's gone, 2,500 feet, 2,400 feet. So we consistently are seeing this, and we have been seeing it for a long period of time, just stressing that this is not anything that is new. Okay, so, oops. All right, so I've been doing this job for about a decade now, and about 5 years into the job, in May of 2020, I got a call that a house collapsed. And I have to tell you, I didn't really even know what that meant. I mean, what does that mean, a house collapse? House had collapsed on the beach in Rodanthe. It was near this image here. And we worked with the owners. They got a permit from us to clean up, and actually went great. They were fantastic to work with. And just because of the wind and the waves that day, not a lot of debris spread. It was no big deal. And we kind of forgot about it. And then in February of 22, and then again in May, twice on the same day, we started having more homes collapse. So we had those 4, and we said, this is going to be a big issue. And it really did. Then we had one in 2023. Oops. Then we had one in 2024, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one, and another one in November, and another one, I'm sorry, that should actually say 2025. We had one in Buxton, and this is the first time a house has collapsed in Buxton in a long period of time. So this is a problem that has been seemingly increasing over time. And is it because the erosion rates are quicker? We don't really know. We don't think so. Is it because something has changed? Perhaps. Dr. Corbett, presented some good information that maybe the frequency of some of these billion-dollar damaging natural disasters are increasing. But really, in most cases, it's just the ocean catching up to the houses. It's finally there in some locations. And when that happens, the houses ultimately end up falling down. So this is what happens when the houses collapse, and this is an important issue to Cape Hatteras Seashore and our visitors that range between 2.5 and over 3 million a year, to the local residents, and certainly to the owners of these structures. None of them wish for this to happen. None of them built these houses in the water or next to the water, and every one of them cares deeply about these problems. And they do create huge problems when the houses collapse. You get a sense here of just how dense the debris can be downstream, wherever the current is taking this debris. This is about a half mile from the site of a house collapse, and you literally cannot even walk on the beach due to the amount of debris that's there. And it's everything, from the pilings, asphalt shingles, tar paper house wrap. We haven't seen any Tyvek house wrap. I guess they hadn't been using that back when these houses were built. Insulation, foam insulation, fiberglass insulation, the textile filling of pillows, mattresses, Monopoly board game pieces, radios, kitchen utensils, water heaters, washing machines, everything that was in the house, because in many cases, unfortunately, the owners didn't have a chance to remove things, which was not their fault. It was a challenging situation. And then there's all these other small things, like tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pieces of drywall that become embedded in the sand and are difficult to remove. But I do want to stress that even before houses collapse, the presence of threatened oceanfront structures causes an ongoing issue. My staff that are typically doing wildlife management patrol spend their days picking up pieces and parts of homes every single day now throughout the year. Pieces break off of retaining walls, fences, materials from underneath the house, sheds, concrete pads that are part of the parking area or maybe the deck around the pool. This was after not even a tropical storm or hurricane, but a low pressure system that affected this area. And all of a sudden, there were multiple fiberglass pools on the beach. Brian can tell you after Hurricane Aaron came through in Buxton, there were 4 pools on Cape Hatteras National Seashore beaches. 4 pools, 4 concrete, large pools. So there are a lot of impacts that occur before the houses collapse. And those impacts are not just a public safety threat or an issue for habitat on the beaches, but there also can be a public health issue. These are pictures of septic infiltration cells related to septic systems. Every day, we pick up parts of people's septic systems along Cape Hatteras Seashore. Every day. The issue was so significant during the summer of 2024 that we marked and worked with environmental health with Dare County, who are great partners on this, and documented between Rodanthe and Buxton, between August 12th and October 1st, more than 20 wastewater systems that were damaged and broke apart, in many cases requiring that we work with the state to post swimming advisories until the water could be tested to show that it was clean. Now, these are very high energy surf systems, so in most cases, any of the wastewater that are in the tanks or in the infiltration cells washes away, but very quickly, and we find that the water is safe from the indicators that would show that there are potential fecal pathogens, but this is an issue and certainly not something folks expect on National Seashore beaches. These are the septic parts that we picked up just in a section of beach that is 1/10 of a mile long following the swells from Hurricane Aaron. I don't build septic systems, but I suspect that's enough probably for a new three-bedroom house. You can also see the debris. That's just one portion of debris. We filled 9 full-size dumpsters with house debris and septic parts just from the swells from Hurricane Erin. And so this gives you a feel of sort of what happened in this area. This is a picture looking at a home that unfortunately collapsed recently. This is August 27th after Erin in Buxton, and you can see September 17th. And I mentioned before this problem of vertical erosion. Look at the amount of sand that's around the pilings here, and you can see how that vertical erosion most likely affected a lot of these houses. This is the result of a house collapse on Tuesday night, a debris field that stretched quite a ways. And this is looking north. This is after Erin in the village of Rodanthe, and then this is from September 17th after a low pressure system came through. Nothing major, not a named storm, not a tropical storm, not a hurricane. And again, you can see just the effect of that vertical erosion in this area, and how when that occurs, a lot of these pilings are much more exposed. And then this is the same day just at high tide, where you can see how the ocean inundates these areas and certainly washes past them. So all hope is not lost. This is something that we are working on together with many, many other agencies. We were really happy to work with the Division of Coastal Management in North Carolina with Tancred and his team in the back, and we brought together an interagency threatened oceanfront structures working group. This is not a simple problem. There's a lot of agencies or a lot of folks that are involved. The idea was not to solve the problem, it was to put ideas on the table that would help decision makers and others advance this issue. I do want to point out that this was just such an incredibly there was so much participation in this group, it was amazing. Everything from the Department of Justice in North Carolina to the Dare County manager to NCDEQ Coastal Management to the Division of Waste Management, all of the agencies that have some role in regulating or responding to factors associated with these structures. And by the way, we had 3 public workshops. You can't see the slide on the top, but we brought in experts to talk about everything from financial assistance. I have 0 minutes left. I just saw that. You've probably been trying to get my attention forever. Come up and hit me, okay. Role of public and private insurance, and then legal and regulatory authority. So if you have a chance to look at this report, you can learn more about the ideas that were presented. They are not going to change the world, but I think if embraced, some of these things will help advance the topic. And that's all I have. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for working with Dare County and the state of North Carolina on this topic. We will make progress together.
Thanks, Dan. All right, so with some of that information, with the idea of the slide I showed earlier, I mean, the idea of what can we do sort of right now? What can a homeowner do right now? And there are some options. Granted, some of these options are going to be limited based on resources available. But thinking of what I showed you earlier, the idea of these 3 options: no response, deconstruct the home, or move the home. And this gives you some idea of maybe the cost of that. What are the potential sources of funds, if there are potential sources of funds, and so who's bearing the cost? And so it's certainly a challenging issue. And again, this is sort of what can the homeowner do, right? There are bigger things that could potentially be done that might be associated with working with Dare County, working with the state, working with the federal government, thinking about policies, but from a homeowner's perspective, what could we potentially do? And in some sense, yeah, it's fairly limited what an individual might be able to do with an at-risk home. And it's also not that cheap, right? This is a challenge that is faced today, and this is why, in many cases, right, what we're seeing is the idea of letting the home collapse. It's not that they want to let the home collapse. Some of this is just the challenge associated where we are today. But to sort of get a bit more information on the potential for insurance, understanding the insurance. We're going to bring in another expert who I hope is online. And so what I want to do is introduce Lisa Sherrard. And she's going to give us a little bit, she is a flood insurance expert, and she's going to give us a little bit more information on that side of the options and understanding. So Lisa is the principal of U.S. Flood Solutions. She'll provide details on the intricacies of insurance claims. Lisa's been involved with all sides of the flood insurance and risk programs. She is a certified floodplain manager with over 25 years experience. Lisa has served as a chair of the Association of State Floodplain Managers and on FEMA's Community Rating System Task Force. So Lisa grew up in Wilmington. She understands the coastlines, and I think that's part of where she gets her passion for working with the insurance and working particularly with flood insurance. And so Lisa, if you're online, you'll get unmuted, and I'll walk through your slides for you.
Fantastic. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So if you just go to the next slide there, just want to kind of cover, some basic things for you. This is, the standard flood insurance policy. This commentary here is really important because it tells you where to find an explanation about what's in your policy form. So what does your policy cover? So this here highlights what's in the agent's manual and what's in the claims manual that the adjuster is going to see. And so you can do this cross-reference if you've got questions about additional living expense, which is not covered under the NFIP policy, or your air conditioning unit or ICC coverage, things like that. You can go get deeper explanations here that complement your policy form. Next slide, please. I only have a few minutes, so I have to keep this thing going. The key thing with the definition of flood, it's normally dry land is a temporary condition or partial or complete inundation of normally dry land of 2 or more properties or 2 or more acres. Overflow of inland waters, unusual rapid accumulation runoff, mud flow, and collapse is included in this. Collapse of subsides along shore or lake or similar body of water result of erosion, undermining caused by wave actions, currents exceeding anticipated cyclical events in the event of as a flood defined above. Key things here are normally dry land, so it's got to be dry land at some point during the day. It can't be overwater all the time unless you have continuous coverage. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then collapse, if that happens, your policy will pay if it's a higher than normal event. And it's a flood. If it's a nice, beautiful day, the water, no unusual event, there could be an issue with the policy paying if it doesn't meet the definition of a flood. So again, you have to have a triggering event in order for that to be. If the structure, next slide, please. If the structure becomes entirely over water, and when it was constructed, it was on dry land, it is eligible for coverage, provided you have continuous coverage. That's important. Don't let these policies lapse because under the new rating system, we cannot change that date. You have a 29-day grace period. On day 30, that policy is gone. We cannot rewrite it, and you would not be eligible for a building entirely over water. Next slide, please. Talk to you about one thing here, loss avoidance claims. For example, if you have a event coming, say we have a hurricane coming, there is a provision under your policy, next slide please, for loss avoidance. You can rent a U-Haul, you can hire a crew to unload the house and move the contents out of the house with that notification of a triggering event. So like we have a hurricane coming, we're going to be starting, evacuations. We're doing our hurricane prep. You can get a U-Haul and move all the contents out of the house. Your policy will pay up to $1,000 for moving expenses and storage. The storage has to be outside the floodplain. So you'd have to move it to a dry area, so it wouldn't get it impacted. But that's $1,000. There's no deductible for that. And it does not count as a claim, so you wouldn't get hit with repetitive loss. But it could be sandbags, plastic sheeting, anything you see here listed. That's important because this is a most underutilized portion of the flood insurance policy. Also want to say for if your claim is denied or a portion of your claim is denied, you can appeal. Once you have a claim and you may get the first check and you may find out that that check was enough to cover the damages, you can go back for a supplemental. But there are disputes that occur. So if you feel like the foundation should have been paid for and it wasn't paid accordingly, the carrier will send an engineer out there and they will do a report. You can hire your own engineer and appeal that decision of the carrier. So if there's a dispute, you have the opportunity to hire your own experts to appeal their decision, and then they'll reconcile based on your expert's opinion. So don't ever think that the final word rests with the carrier or with FEMA. It really is, you have the option to appeal and submit supplemental information to get additional money paid. And that's really important. One last slide here. If you have questions, you can't get something reconciled with FEMA, the Office of the Flood Insurance Advocate is there to assist you with your questions and concerns. And they kind of act as an independent body within the National Flood Insurance Program. So with that, I'm going to hand it off. This is my contact information, and I am in Wilmington. That I'm going to hand it off to Steve McGuggan. He is the Assistant Director of the Emergency Management, North Carolina Department of Public Safety. Steve has spent 24 years in the Army. Thank you for your service. Retiring in 2015, he began his North Carolina-based emergency management career in 2017, shortly after Hurricane Matthew hit this state. Steve is native of Durham, North Carolina. Steve, it's all yours.
Lisa, thank you very much. And while they're trying to load up the slides, there we go. I appreciate it. So for all of you, thank you. I apologize I cannot be there. Intent was to be there, but unfortunately meeting in Raleigh today and could not get away in time to be able to drive and be with you. What I'd like to cover real quick, like with you, is the FEMA Hazard Mitigation Program. Explain to you what hazard mitigation may be able to provide. Again, the state runs FEMA's program. Next slide, please. Hazard mitigation assistance are grants that are provided by FEMA. And again, the state manages those grants based on the funds provided. Please understand the state, while it will work with you to build the application and get that application submitted to FEMA, FEMA is the one that approves whether anything can be done and provides the funding for that. Again, we're trying to mitigate risk, trying to break the cycle of the damage, and we focus at wide risk reduction projects as well as home projects themselves. If you can go to the next slide, please. As the state, again, we're going to apply for the funding on your behalf. We will work with FEMA to get that funding and to basically argue for your properties to be taken care of at all possible cost. We work to get them to a benefit cost ratio of 1 or greater. That is something that must be met. It can be looked at as an overall project. So if there's 15 homes there in your area that we are trying to do with Dare County, and maybe a couple of them don't meet a benefit cost ratio of 1 individually, we will group as many homes together as possible to get the overall project greater than 1. So while that benefit cost ratio of 1 or greater may be a concern if you have a very expensive piece of property, given what FEMA allows per property, again, we work to build a project that meets that benefit cost ratio of 1. Depending upon what grant we are after and try to put you into, that grant may require that you have an active NFIP policy. Again, some grants do not. That's basically the hazard mitigation grant that is provided to the state after a declared event. But if it is a non-declared grant or a non-disaster grant, then an NFIP policy will be required. Again, we work with each of you, dealing with the county and with the homeowners to be able to meet all those requirements. Finally, what I will like to say is that based on the value, and everybody, and I can see in the chat, a lot of this is going on asking about value. What the grant will pay, whether it is a disaster or non-disaster grant, is it will pay at the time of acquisition the pre-storm value or the current market value. And again, that's left to me working on your behalf to get the most value for the property. It does not pay the tax card value. So if your tax card value says it's $250,000, if the pre-storm value could be higher than 250, we will go for that amount. If the current market value is greater than 250, we will go for that amount. If the amount at the time of appraisal is less than the tax card value, I cannot get the tax card value. It has to be the appraisal at the time that the acquisition, if you're going for acquisition, at the time of acquisition. I will also say the previous slide before I started this also talked about moves. Please understand, we may be able to move the home, but to be able to move it, it has to be to a property that is not located in the special flood hazard area. Unfortunately, most of the Outer Banks, as you know, rate as a special flood hazard area, meaning that it is going to be covered with water at some time. That makes it very difficult to do the moves. But if there is a piece of property and you own that piece of property on the island and it is not located per the flood maps in the special flood hazard area, a household move may be possible. But again, we have to work the cost. And we have to work each of those again with the county and the homeowner on a case-by-case basis. Again, very fast, and I understand it was very fast covering this. Next slide, please. I know we can't take questions right now, but once we go to questions, if there is any, I'll be glad to answer them. So with that, I will hand this off to Barton Grover, who is there representing you from Barton County, Dare County, and who we work with very often. But Barton is the Grants and Waterways Administrator for the county, a graduate of UNC with a Juris Doctor degree, and he'll explain if you are a homeowner, a home at risk, and interested in the FEMA grant programs. Again, Barton will be your contact to submit an application to the state. So Barton, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Steve. So yeah, I'm just following along with what Steve brought up. Essentially, what are the opportunities right now? He kind of dived into the details of each program. Currently, there is a HMGP opportunity, the result of a disaster, both from post-tropical storm 8 and also Helene. And so this is a competitive process. We'll switch slides. Okay. And so the first one is the HMGP. As I spoke about, Dare County has previously elevated over 100 structures through this grant program, and we're currently elevating some right now. So for a lot of the homes maybe that aren't first row, second row, or farther away, this is an opportunity for you all to apply for an elevation. That is above base flood elevation. A lot of the homes built recently are already at the required elevation, so it would be a one-on-one review to make sure you are below base flood elevation in a flood zone to qualify. But just so you all know, we're not just talking about acquisition, we are talking about elevation also. And then also, as we talked about, voluntary acquisition at a negotiable fair market value. Steve dived into kind of the details of that, so I don't need to elaborate. And as he spoke about, it is a competitive grant with limited funding and a 2 to 3 year plus timeline. So I just want you all to temper expectations on the timeline of what FEMA and HMGP can do. Right now, the deadline is October 31st. We are hearing that that might be extended, but we do have a turnaround time for you all to get the application to me, and then for us to turn it around to Steve and the state. So please, if you can, submit an application by October 15th. If you're in the building, there are applications over on the table over there. This QR code that's on this presentation also has a link to request the application, and you can always reach out to me. My contact information is on a couple slides from now. Next slide. And then future grant opportunities. Obviously, we have this one that has a deadline of October 31st, but there are future opportunities not just related to storms. One is called the FMA. That is available each year to whether elevate or acquire, typically for severe repetitive loss structures. But we can only apply for these grants if we have applications from you all. These are awarded by property. We don't receive funds and then dole them out. We have to have a homeowner complete application for that specific property because that's how it is awarded. So if that homeowner pulls out at a future time, that money isn't available to transfer to someone else who's interested. We do need your application. And so we did establish this voluntary interest form. It has a few questions, essentially just to get on a list. And then I will reach out to you when a grant opens up, whether it's FMA yearly or the Helene or post-tropical storm 8. And it's, as I spoke about and what Steve said earlier, it's completely voluntary. Even when applying for this HMGP, you can essentially pull out anytime before closing. So just so you all know, when you submit an application, you are not locked in until you sign on the dotted line at closing. And same thing with this voluntary interest form. It's not signing you up to anything. It's just for me to reach out to you and let you know there are opportunities to elevate, to acquire, or any other opportunities that might come up. I did provide my contact information on this if you want to reach out. And I did, next slide, just want to bring up, Dave mentioned the meeting that was held earlier this month. Just for context, Dare County has been performing beach nourishment projects in Buxton. Back in the 2017-2018 project where 2.6 million cubic yards were placed. And then again in 2022 as a re-nourishment with 1.2 million cubic yards at approximately $18 million. There is going to be a 2026 project that was originally scheduled for 2027. Dare County and the board moved that up to 2026. And permit applications have been submitted both for the nourishment and also for the repair of the jetty. So that is currently being reviewed and projected to happen in 2026. And if you all were at the September meeting, you were kind of part of that review process. What's not mentioned is Verdanthe. We have done feasibility studies for Verdanthe. The cost estimated was about $40 million or more. And currently, based on the beach nourishment funding model and also grant opportunities, there's nothing available at that dollar amount when we've sought those both from the state and federal government. We are still actively looking for grants. We are still assessing the beach nourishment model each year. And we have been successful in obtaining some grants for Buxton and others, but typically they're in the $3 million range or $5 million, and we haven't been able to obtain anything close to the $40 million that is what Verdanthe project would be projected at. But did want to provide you all context just for what's upcoming in Buxton. And with that, I will switch it over to Andrea, who will be our moderator for the Q&A. Andrea Webster is a resilience policy advisor for the State Resilience Office based in the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. And like I mentioned, Andrea will moderate.
And if we can get all our panelists to come up.
Okay, and while they are all coming forward, I'm going to get us set up for the panel here. So we have 8 folks that are going to join us on this panel. We have 6 in person and 2 online. And so we, in addition to those 8 folks, we have about 30 additional experts that are online. Some of them are in the room. These folks are here because this is a complex issue, as you've heard today, and we want to make sure that you all get direct answers from the people that are working on this day to day. So how we're going to manage this panel today is that the folks online have been putting questions in the chat, and so we'll bounce between questions online and in the room. For those in the room, Helena here has a mic, so we'll ask you to speak into the mic. The reason for that is because we are recording this meeting, and it'll be posted online and on Dare County's TV channel, and so we need to pick up your audio. So please speak into the mic when Helena hands it to you, and then we'll have Holly speak out loud the questions that are coming in online. So with that, I want to start the panel today by asking our folks here in person, and then we'll move online, to introduce yourselves. So tell your name, who you work for, and then how your expertise relates to this issue.
Yeah, I'm Josh Coltrane. I'm the Environmental Health Supervisor with Dare County, and we enforce the 18E septic laws and rules.
Hey, my name is Stan Miller. I am the Director of the Division of Coastal Management within DEQ. We work with the Coastal Resources Commission and their rules for coastal development. So we permit these structures initially when they went on the beach, most of them. And we also have a role in beach nourishment and the jetty replacement, et cetera.
I'm Dave Halleck. I'm the superintendent of Cape Hatteras National Seashore. I have the pleasure of managing about 80 miles of public trust beaches and working with many of the homeowners whose houses are right up against Park Service property.
Again, I'm Reed Corbett, the Executive Director here at the Coastal Studies Institute. I've been working on the Outer Banks, studying the Outer Banks since about 2000. I grew up coming to the Outer Banks, although my expertise really is in sort of in coastal change.
Again, I'm Barton Grover. I'm the Grants and Waterways Administrator for Dare County. And like I mentioned, I will be your contact if you are looking for grants. And so feel free to contact me anytime after this meeting with any questions.
Hello, I'm Allison Flynn. I'm a coastal advocate and environmental economist with the North Carolina Coastal Federation. We are a nonprofit, member-supported nonprofit that works in the state of North Carolina within the 20 coastal counties. And I have previously served as part of on the panel giving policy advice for the Threatened Oceanfront Structures report. And I think our last person's online, so.
So Steve and then Lisa, would you like to introduce yourselves again
Yes.
briefly?
Lisa Sherrard, Choice Flood Insurance and U.S. Flood Solutions. I am in Wilmington, and I'm former state coordinator, so I used to run the mitigation, mapping, and compliance programs, and very familiar with Dare County.
And good evening again. This is Steve McGugan. I'm the Assistant Director for Hazard Mitigation for North Carolina Emergency Management.
All right, well, let's open it up for questions. Do we have any in the room? We'll start here.
Why would it take 10 months for paperwork to get your house moved on your land?
Did we hear the question? Yeah. Can you repeat the question directly
Why
into the
would
mic?
it take 10 months to get permits to be able to move your house on your land?
I guess that one's for me. I'm aware of your case, and what I can say is it comes down to choices that are made as to where that house is going to be moved to. In this particular case, there was one option to relocate that house to a spot that could have been permitted within 10 days, or the other option was to relocate to a spot that involved filling of coastal wetlands and 404 wetlands, which takes a longer time to permit.
And we got a question in the front.
Okay, I'm Lat Williams from Buxton. My house is currently uninhabitable, although it's not damaged itself. Okay, Dr. Corbett, in the stats that you showed, the increasing number of billion-dollar catastrophes, just curious, was that $1 billion adjusted for inflation?
So this is a data set from NOAA. If I remember correctly, it basically is $1 billion based on the year that storm took place.
Okay, so then the more recent years with inflation and everything costs $1 billion, you're going to naturally see a big increase in the number of billion-dollar storms. Is that correct?
Certainly, but you also have to recognize that over the last 25 years, again, that data set was for about 1980, the number of homes that we have in harm's way has also increased.
I understand, but I guess my point is it skews negatively. When you look at that, you think, oh man, this is just increasing like crazy, but a storm 30 years ago did not cost the same as a storm today.
So I would need to go back and check that data
Okay.
again, it's not my data, but it's a great question. And so for me I don't want to tell you wrong, but I'll check and certainly get
Okay.
back with you.
Because it would be good to see it if it were adjusted for
Sure.
inflation. You also mentioned, when you showed that picture of the previous erosion trouble spot in Nag's Head,
Nags Head, South Nags Head.
why previous? What happened?
What I meant by that is those homes were previously there. I mean, that is still an area with high erosion.
Okay.
Right? The erosion rate in that location is still 10 plus feet per year. And so,
Okay, I just, it sounded
yes, so
possibly like that had fixed itself.
has not.
Okay. Dave, you very quickly ripped through a slide that had a report. I think it was about possible solutions, and there was a whole laundry list. I didn't even get a chance to take a picture of it. Where do we get that report?
Yeah, so you can get that report online, and I'll leave you with a copy. Just Google Threatened Oceanfront Structures Working Group Report, North Carolina, and you'll see a web page that's managed by the state of North Carolina, by the Division of Coastal Management, and right there, front and center, you just click on it and you can download the report for free. And yes, it has a list of 11 ideas that are meant to advance the issue of solving the threatened oceanfront structures problem, everything related to insurance reform, ways to provide more financial assistance to homeowners to move or remove their houses, et cetera.
Lisa, you there? Lisa Sherrard?
May take a moment to unmute her, but go ahead and ask your question.
The question, when you had the slide talking about when you remove property, like if I took the contents of my house out and put it in storage, and the cost is covered, and you said it does not count as a claim, just curious, does the deductible apply since it doesn't count as a claim?
Zero deductible.
Okay, good answer.
It is not counted as claim. It's up to $1,000, but you got to have receipts. You can't pay cash. You got to pay by check. So, you've got to have receipts. So if you're hiring the neighbors, kids to do it, you're going to have to pay them by check and get it, hours. You're going to have to keep the hours they worked, and you've got to have the documentation to prove.
Okay.
And they'll pay, fair market value for the labor, but you have to have the receipts.
Thank you. All right, I had a question from one of my neighbors. If the house on the beachfront collapses due to storm flooding, and they get an insurance settlement for that from NFIP, if then beach renourishment is done and you have 200 feet of beach out in front and that land is essentially back, can they rebuild on that site that was their land, that they didn't sell their land?
That would be up to to the state and local. There would be nothing under the policy that would prohibit them from rebuilding.
So it would depend on whether or not their land was taken by the sea, the land itself, not just the structure. So if the land, if the mean high water moves landward of their landward boundary line, then that's now considered state property, and their land would be.
But then you build 200 feet of beach out in front of that, so that land is automatically goes to the national park?
It's publicly funded project, so then it belongs to the public.
What's a funded project?
The beach nourishment,
That's a county.
that's public money.
And we'd be happy to dive into that more afterwards too.
taxes
So we
for
can,
that.
it might be helpful to draw it out on a piece of paper.
To follow up real quick on your question regarding inflation, it is inflation adjusted.
Hi, Amy Kramer, 23038 GA Kohler Drive. I appreciate your science very much, but this is more than a science issue. This is a personal issue. And I don't know if you've ever had the unfortunate opportunity to listen to a house fall into the ocean. It sounds like ribs being cracked during CPR. That's what it sounds like. So I'm just a little confused as to why the number of 40 million is surprising for beach nourishment in Rodanthe, Mr. Miller, when we've never had beach nourishment. And if we add up the cost of other areas, looking at just what you've shown here, seems reasonable that I believe since 1995 we've not had beach nourishment, that by not taking care of that for so many years, 40 million would be reasonable. So why is it that Rodanthe is the only place that's not getting beach nourishment? And please don't tell me it's because we don't provide enough money, because no one wants to hear that they're poor.
I'll have to turn that to the county, or my office has no role in funding beach nourishment. We issue the permits, but we don't fund it. We don't select the projects that get funded. That's another office within DEQ. But it's combination of funding between state, local, sometimes entirely local. But if someone from the county can respond to that one.
This is a little bit out of my job title for beach nourishment. So from my understanding, the funding model accounts for all projects that are ongoing and projects maintenance and revenues. If a Rodanthe project was added, there's insufficient funding to continue on with all the other nourishment projects, from my understanding. And we have been unsuccessful in obtaining grants. We have been denied by FEMA. They have indicated they would not fund a Rodanthe project for beach nourishment. Essentially, no beach nourishment projects they would fund. Again, I'm just going after the grants, but that is my understanding.
Thank you, Barton, for actually writing the grants and trying to do something. And I do appreciate you try, but there has to be a solution that's better than, let me take your home. I don't rent there, I live there. I trust you. I don't have the power to make a change. You do. And so I'm asking you, even if it's not your responsibility exactly, or it's above your pay grade, we trust you to do something. You have the power.
Thank you very much. Let's move to some questions online. Maybe we'll take 3 questions online and then we'll come back to the room.
I would like to know if there are options to expedite the move of a house rather than wait the 4+ weeks for a survey to be completed. Is there anyone that can be provided by the state that can do this quicker, or possibly an emergency act that could be enforced to help families like ours save our home? We lost our house this Tuesday because we couldn't get all the permits quick enough, even though we had a mover set up and septic approved, that it could all happen, and there was enough space on our lot we planned to move.
Yeah, that's tough to answer without knowing the specifics of when, how long that application was in. I'd have to see the specifics to respond to that.
Okay, we can move to the next question. Can we implement wave attenuation devices in lieu of sandbags for temporary protection measures? They are movable, temporary, and work in arrays to mitigate wave energy.
Okay. So it's there's limits on what can be put under state law, what can be put to control erosion or impact wave energy on the oceanfront. And this is by state law. This is not by commission rules. And currently, the only thing you can use is sandbags to control erosion on the oceanfront.
Great. Thank you, Tankard. Next question is, Buxton has a jetty. Why is that not an option for Rodanthe?
So again, it goes back to the state statute. There's a prohibition on new hard structures on the oceanfront to control erosion, except in very limited circumstances. So you can get a permit for a terminal groin, but it has to be at the terminus of an island. Rodanthe is not fit that definition, so there's no statutory ability for us to permit a terminal groin or hard structure in Rodanthe.
Great. Thank you, Tankard. This question is for Steve. Does North Carolina have a state mitigation program, or do we have plans to pursue that?
So the state does not have a mitigation program unless the General Assembly provides that in law. Again, we administer FEMA's mitigation program under North Carolina Emergency Management. If the state, through the General Assembly, does authorize funding, then that would fall to this office. But right now, there is not one in statute.
All right, thank you. Let's pause for a second. So we've brought up a lot of issues so far. I know that the folks that were participating in the work groups for the Threatened Oceanfront Structures report spent a lot of time and met with a lot of folks from the public to get input. Allison, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what other states are doing. I know, Dave, you mentioned that states all along the Eastern Coast are dealing with this. I think even around the world, there are other countries that are dealing with this issue. So, Allison, I would love if you could share some of those ideas.
Sure. Can you hear me? Yeah. So we started looking at other states, coastal states just within the United States, to see what the extent of the issue was, and also any states that had sound policies that North Carolina might be able to emulate, or maybe help cover gaps that we might have in existing policies. Right off the bat, every single state that has a coastline had issues similar, or in some way similar to what we're experiencing. And some of the themes that quickly popped up from states that are working to address this through policies surrounded disclosures. They also surrounded identifying, properly defining what a cleanup looks like, and what authority, or who has the authority to make sure that a house collapse is properly cleaned up, whether that's on the homeowner or the local government. I think a couple states like Hawaii was very interesting because they were actually going through the same thing that North Carolina was back in 2022 when we had back-to-back house collapses in Rodanthe. They had a similar situation, very different coastline, but they also formed an interagency working group that not only involved agencies, but nonprofits in the scientific community, and pushed forward some policies from that surrounding the cleanup efforts, and also what it means, kind of defining better what it means to have a house that was on private property, and then due to whatever erosion or landslides in Hawaii's case, kind of how to handle that now that it was on public property. So those are kind of, I guess, the themes that really popped up from that research.
Great, thanks, Allison. It's really helpful to hear that it's not just us struggling with this issue. And hopefully someone, if we don't come up with a good solution first, hopefully somebody else will that we can mimic. Next, I'd like to hand it over to Josh a little bit. So Josh is with the local health department here. So Dave, we saw your very impactful photo of the piles of septic system pieces that were just, kind of gathered in one day. So, Josh, can you talk a little bit about what the kind of like why this is happening and why we can't prevent it from happening? From like, why can't we just go and remove all these things ahead of time, or why do we keep seeing these septic systems exposed?
Well, we have to stay within the scope of the state 18E rules, and these property owners do have rights. The first step, when the septic system is damaged, they have to initiate an application with us and then have a new physical survey done showing the mean high water mark. They submit that to us, we review it, we look at all the setbacks. If they meet the setbacks, then we are legally obligated to issue these people a repair permit. That's that we have to stay within the scope of the laws of the state.
Thanks, Josh. That's helpful. All right, let's do 2 or 3 more questions here in the room. And if there are none, I'll save Helena the trip. Oh, we have got one here in the middle. Okay.
Hi. Hi, my name is Emmy. I live in Kitty Hawk. I grew up there. I want to know, given all of the data, how we're guiding developers moving forward. We've talked a lot about what's going on right now, but I'm curious about what we're going to do.
I think it's a really good question, and it's important to address at the state level, local level. I think at this point, when you look at North Carolina and where we sit in policy related to development, related to sort of home development, we're still using policies from, I believe, 2018, where most states are using policies from 2020 or newer. And so North Carolina is behind, in my opinion, on what we should be doing as far as development and policy related to development. And that's being done, I mean, that's purposeful. That is what is being put forward through our state leaders, asking local governments to put in stricter rules locally rather than at the state level. And this is a challenge across the state. It's not just coastal North Carolina. It's in the redevelopment, rebuilding, and western parts of the states as well. Right? North Carolina needs to look at how we're developing, where we're developing, and update some of those rules to prepare, just like you said, to prepare for what's coming. That's, again, not from a policy person, but from science.
What I would add to that is, if you look just at DEQ, you have Andrea, you've got folks in the back, you've got my office. We're working on the resilience concept and working directly with local governments, providing scientific information, technical information, engineering information, et cetera, providing resources to these communities and to the folks who live in those communities to help them understand that they can do things voluntarily, not just looking at what's the minimum standard in the building code, what's the minimum standard in the CRC's rules, but how can you do better? How can you look forward to things that are coming in the future and all the stuff that Reed and Dave showed. So we're providing resources to help folks to get to a better place when they do either new development or redevelopment.
I'm just curious, actually, I just thought of this. Does anyone know if we're still developing at the same rate we were a decade ago, given this?
I don't know that specifically, but I know on Hatteras Island, the amount of vacant lots that are left to develop on are, they're few and far between. So I'd say that that would be a big constraint moving forward with the rate of development on Hatteras at least.
And I am just going to jump in, not onto the erosion, but at least in the flood point. When FEMA changed their maps and reduced some of the flood elevations in Dare County, there was a local flood elevation standard established essentially to mirror the original FEMA, to essentially make it a minimum of 8 foot above sea level, to continue that, even though FEMA now required a lesser elevation, just because we knew what kind of flooding we see around in Dare County. So that was something that was proactive by the county to continue that elevation standard rather than lowering standards as allowed by FEMA.
Okay, let's move to a few questions online. I'm guessing there's a few more lined up. So if we could take the mic to the back of the room, and we'll read off a few of those.
We're going to try to move through these in the order that they've come in, just for the folks online. We'll do our best. Is there any forethought for the natural bathymetry of our shores when further beach nourishment, for further beach nourishment in the future when projects are completed?
Bathymetry has to be measured from the borrow area where they're pulling sand from, as well as the planned project. And so bathymetry is certainly taken into account. The volume of sand that is being pulled from these borrow areas is oftentimes, small in comparison to the amount of sand in many of these shoals. Dare County is sort of lucky in the quality of sand and the amount of sand that it has offshore, and not that far offshore relative to some of our sister coasts to the south. So from a sand resource perspective, Dare County is doing fairly well. I'm not saying we have the resources to get that sand, but the sand is out there, and the bathymetry is taken into account.
And what is bathymetry?
Sorry, it's changes in the depth. So think about shoals, the shallow areas versus the deeper areas. And so evaluating how the depth changes, where the sand's being taken from, but also near shore as that project is being built, the depth that they create by adding sand to the beach.
Okay, next question is, the slides mentioned beach nourishment for Buxton, but South Nags Head is in need of this too.
Nags Head is, that's an area that does see a project every roughly 5 years or so. And so Nags Head and the northern beaches tend to align when they do their nourishment projects. And so right now within Dare County, it's most of the northern beaches, if not all. And so Nags Head North, Avon, and Buxton.
Nags Head is planning a beach nourishment project in the next 2 years, and that project will actually taper into Cape Hatteras National Seashore. So we're processing their permit application so that the taper can start right at the stormwater outflow pipe at the south end of South Nags Head and come into the park so they can fully realize the design of their project. And Cape Hatteras National Seashore developed a sediment management plan in 2021 so that we did not have to perform a new environmental review for every time either Dare County or partners, for example, in Nags Head wanted to perform beach nourishment project that might also come into the seashore. So we did that and have a variety of conditions associated with that. And those conditions are similar to the conditions that the state of North Carolina has and the conditions that the Army Corps of Engineers has. They're an important permitting agency that permits beach nourishment projects. So that allows us to provide all that information up front and process a beach nourishment permit application quickly. We also require monitoring associated with those projects because you may know that there are impacts when you nourish a beach, particularly in all of the organisms living near the shoreline. And so we're looking to see that all of those things, the sand crabs, the coquina clams, all the things that make up that ecosystem recover quickly. And actually some of the research on that has been done by Dr. Corbett. And the nice thing about the Outer Banks is that we tend to see that those communities recover very quickly, which allows us to permit the projects again on the frequency that our partners are asking for.
And just for those that might not be familiar, so beach nourishment is essentially addition of sand onto the beach as a temporary, not solution, right? So as a temporary amendment, I guess, to the beach to buy time. Literally you are buying time. It does not change the processes that I spoke about earlier, the shoreline erosion, sea level rise, those things that are leading to these high erosion rates of 5, 10, 15 feet per year. That doesn't change with beach nourishment. Beach nourishment buys time to develop what the next solution might be. That's ultimately what you're doing with nourishment. That's why it's usually a beach nourishment program or project. It's not a single event. It's an event planning for the next event and hopefully planning for what we're going to do beyond nourishment, because it's not the solution to the problem at hand.
All right, next question.
Great, thank you. Acknowledging that FEMA BRIC program has been shelved under the current presidential administration, did NCEM ever submit a BRIC application for beach nourishment or anything to help address this overall issue?
And do we have Steve online?
Yeah,
still?
I'm on
And
the
could you
line.
explain what BRIC is as well. Thanks.
Well, BRIC, for everybody in the audience, was the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program that FEMA sponsored from 2020 till 2023. Barton, I don't believe we ever did a beach nourishment package for you, did we?
Yes, we did submit one. I think it was 2022 or 2023. It was submitted, and we did get feedback, I think, from the National Review Panel. It could have been the North Carolina Emergency Management Review Panel, that it was not eligible to be awarded, again, due to cost and the temporary nature of the nourishment.
Okay, so that would have been from the national panel.
Yeah.
Yeah, the national panel would have made that. So
Yes.
the answer is yes, it was submitted. I had to ask Barton to verify for me because of all the number of projects. But if we receive feedback like that, that would have been from the national panel.
Okay, we'll move to the next question.
That, as the commenter did mention, yeah, that program is no longer right now eligible to be applied for.
Thanks, Barton. Our next question is, thanks for the erosion history. However, any economic studies done on financial impact of not doing replenishment projects on Hatteras Island? $2 billion added to the North Carolina economy from visitor spending per year from this area. Where does that number go as our beaches overrun with abandoned and collapsing homes? Investments discussed tonight total around 3% of the annual economic impact per year, which seems like a good investment to keep up tourism.
I actually don't have an answer to the commenter. I think my guess is there's somebody that has those economics. I don't have them. I think it's important to consider the economics, and certainly I know Dare County has to do that when managing the multiple nourishment programs that they have. And so that is the challenge, excuse me, the challenge faced within the county for managing a growing number of programs that they had. Again, all of this started in about 2010 with Nags Head's first sort of locally funded nourishment. That's what got it all started. So I don't have the economics. I don't know if anybody else on the panel has.
Indirectly, for the Rodanthe application for BRIC, as Steve McGugan was talking about earlier, just like elevation or acquisition of homes, FEMA, when they're reviewing, needs to see a benefit cost of greater than 1. Essentially, what's the cost? Does it benefit more than that cost? And we did have a consultant review the Rodanthe project. They showed that the benefits of doing a Rodanthe project greatly exceeded the $40 million cost. Again, so we checked that box for FEMA. I can't remember the number off the top of my head if it was 70 or 80 million worth of benefits. Based on a 7 to 10 year lifespan, I believe. But that is not directly answering their question, but is an example of showing that, you know, the benefits of beach nourishment as is done throughout Dare County is greater than the cost to do so.
Great, thanks, Barton. The next question is, can you please tell us about the beach nourishment timeline?
Actually, Dave may know this a little bit better than me since that's our project manager is handling that, but I believe the timeline is spring of 2026 is anticipated to begin the Buxton project. And I'm not exactly sure on the repair. I know they're trying to do that at a similar timeline. Dave?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Barton. So we have a question, specific question about a specific house. My house is the greenhouse next to the house that just fell in the ocean. I cannot wait months or years for help. How are you going to help me make sure my house doesn't fall in the ocean in the next 6 months?
So this is a good question, and while our panelists are considering it, I'll say thank you to whoever put this in the chat. So I think this gets at the crux of the issue, is just how quickly this can fall upon our homes. So, you know, the erosion is happening gradually over time, and it's getting worse, as Reed explained, but it can also happen overnight, as we saw with Hurricane Erin, just kind of pulling a whole bunch of sand away. And so I think it's important for us, for homeowners that are, you know, first row certainly, but also second and third row, to have a plan in place and to start working on this. And I think that goes to the point of talking with Dare County to see what your options are, because every single property is different. And the amount of how much over water you are is going to be different on every parcel. What options are available to you might be different from parcel to parcel. So it's a really great question.
I will just affirm, as far as on the grant side for acquisition or elevation, the timeline has been 2 to 3 years plus. So it is not a quick answer, as the commenter mentioned.
Yeah, and so to expand on that a little bit, so Steve McGugan was here from North Carolina, or is here from North Carolina Emergency Management, is with us online. He explained that there's 2 programs now available through FEMA, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, and occasionally there is also funding through the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program. Those are called HMGP and FMA, respectively. And so we want to make sure it's very clear that, you know, Dare County is planning to submit an application for HMGP, or the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, this fall, but that funding is tentative, right? So first of all, FEMA has to say, yes, Dare County, we want to give you the funds. And then if they do say yes, it's going to take, from our experience, it takes 3, 4, 5 years for that funding to actually arrive here in Dare County for us to be able to spend it. So know that, in the meantime, if your house happens to collapse, that means you're no longer eligible to receive those funds. So, but it still doesn't hurt to fill out that the voluntary interest form. That I think we've put a link to that in the chat, and we'll share more links to it here in the room. So please make sure to fill out that form.
And
Andrew, if I may.
Oh yeah, Steve, go ahead.
Okay. Please understand that, first off, the time is not terribly that long, but it does take time because it has to go up, it has to be evaluated by FEMA, and then the funds approved. Once it comes back down, the funds only come at the lowest level to the county if the county does the project. If the state does the project, again, if we're acquiring your home, then the funds only go to the government. It does not go to you. Us as the state, or the county as the county, would actually buy the property from you. So I want to be clear, it's not that you're getting those funds directly from FEMA. It's a reimbursable program, and they reimburse either the county or the state, whoever does the actual purchase of the land.
And just in case we do have some people who've already reached out to me on elevation or acquisition on the call, if you have submitted it to me in the last 2 or 3 months, that has already been submitted up to the state as a letter of interest, as they call that first initial step. And so we have submitted about 14 Rodanthe acquisition applications, and then about 45 to 47 elevation applications throughout the entire county. So feel free to reach out to me and confirm that I received your application. It's been submitted, at least on that initial step, the letter of interest, but I did want to, just in case we did have anybody on the call. And then as Steve referenced, for elevations, yeah, the money goes to the state for this HMGP. They hire the contractor to elevate your property. And just so let you know, like, it is not you hiring the contractor. The state goes through a bidding process to hire a contractor to elevate. And so that funding kind of goes directly to the contractor and not through Dare County or through you hiring a contractor in the case of elevations.
I'll add one more thing. I'm not familiar with the greenhouse, but I would say I would encourage that person to reach out to our office and see if there's anything we can do to help buy some more time while these processes play out. There might be things we can do to help stabilize that structure until some different relief.
And Tancred's office is the Division of Coastal Management.
Thank you.
With the
Yes.
Department of Environmental Quality.
Elizabeth City office.
Yep. And it seems like we have a question here in the front.
I got to know all of you pretty well. Thank you for everything you guys have done. That last comment about the greenhouse in Buxton, everybody's terribly sorry the way Tower Circle looks right now. I founded the Buxton Civic Association. I know most of the homeowners. Unfortunately, I think a lot of you guys on Tower Circle are going to have to come to the realization that your house probably won't be there for beach nourishment. I know that's a tough pill to swallow. It is for us too, with the Civic Association, just all the strides we made in getting the beach stabilized and stuff. But I think we need to be real about the condition of Buxton right now. There's 19 houses in the ocean. I think we need to have the conversation about how we contain when they do fall. Can we get cargo netting around these houses? Is there any way we can limit the debris field to miles of Hatteras and just contain it to one little section? But I think we're beyond the 8-ball in Buxton right now. All you homeowners on Tower Circle, from the greenhouse, former Lighthouse Still, we know the house well, all the way to Ormar. You guys, it doesn't look good for you guys. I really don't think your house will be there, any of them, this April. I think that needs to be said, and I think you guys really need to start being ready to it. What are we going to do? How are we going to address this cleanup? How can we make the cleanup easier for everybody involved? I just don't see any house on Tower Circle being there in April.
Brian, regarding if somebody does think their house is going to collapse, we would just encourage them to try to get a cleanup permit for us and to secure a contractor. We provide that free. It takes just a few minutes to fill out. And we like to work with the homeowners to see what can we do to partner with our contractors. We typically find that it takes dozens of people up to a week. We were very lucky with a house that recently collapsed in Buxton because probably 75% of it actually stayed on the beach. And their contractor, who responded immediately, pulled it up and prevented, like I said, the large majority of it from going in the ocean. And that meant that we had 30 staff out the next day, and by the end of the day, they had cleaned most of the debris up. So that's good. It's all about a quick response. So we would just encourage folks to reach out to us, and we can work with them and try to develop a game plan. You just have to be prepared, and especially when the ocean's rough and there's a strong current. If you think about a longshore current that's moving just a few miles an hour, it doesn't take long in a 12-hour period for the debris to be more than 10 miles away. We have had folks ask about cargo netting, including folks in the room here, and we've looked into this a little bit. The issue, of course, is that it's a very, very powerful ocean, so without some type of a serious mooring buoy to moor one side of the netting, it's very difficult. The one thing that also saved some of the southern portion of Buxton and the Cape Point area from a large debris field was actually the southernmost jetty, which stopped a lot of the large wood from going around it and made some of the cleanup easier.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left, so maybe we'll start with 2 more questions from the online chat.
What are you going to do to ensure houses in Buxton don't wash away? These timelines are not going to help that. This is what Buxton owners want to know.
Address as best. I mean, Brian said it pretty clear, as hard as it is to hear. And I think working with the park to try and manage some of that.
Anyone here that I've skipped over? Is there a resiliency office looking for a holistic approach like the Dutch have been doing for decades to improve survivability of the shoreline and the structures?
Sure, yeah.
Sure, yeah, I can take that one. So as Barton mentioned briefly while he was introducing me, I'm with the state's State Resilience Office. We are an office within the Department of Environmental Quality, and yes, that is our job. We are working across the state to try to find, to help communities find the right solutions to their resilience challenges. This one is particularly challenging. That's the reason why we brought all these people together today in partnership with Dare County and many others to try to bring, and I know that's a lot of the work that the work group did several years ago, or 2 years ago, as they pulled the work group report together. So yeah, if folks have ideas, they're welcome to come to us and submit them in a form online that I'll talk to you about in a moment.
And quickly, I want to just follow up. So in the last week, I've heard multiple comparisons to our coastline and what the Dutch are doing to manage flooding across their country. And although you can appreciate the amount of engineering going into what the Dutch are doing, it does not translate to the North Carolina coast. The North Carolina coast is extremely different than the Dutch coast for many reasons. Some of it's the drivers that we talked about, the energy of the system, the wind-driven waves, the size of the waves, and the energy we have in our system. But also, if you look at the Dutch's shoreline, they actually have very few hardened structures. They use nourishment as well. Where they're hardened structures, you find most of their hardened structures, their levees, their dikes, are on the interior managing flooding, not on the ocean side. And so it's not an easy comparison. I appreciate what the Dutch are doing to try and manage flooding. And they're doing it in a way that is working for them. It does not translate to the North Carolina coast.
Thanks, Reed. Maybe one more question online.
Will the Buxton jetties be rebuilt before the 2026 beach nourishment project starts?
Again, I think Dave may know this better since he's the one permitting. I think it's concurrent is the plan, but I'm not sure of which one will precede the other. My assumption would be beach nourishment, but I'm uncertain of that. I would have to talk to our project manager.
Yeah, what's been presented to us is that both projects would occur sometime this summer. Not exactly clear if the nourishment would mostly happen before the groin, but it sounds like it would be that way based on the information that we have. And it's just to repair the southernmost groin, not the other two groins. By the way, the groins were built starting in 1970, and the construction stopped in 1975, and it was not to protect the village of Buxton. Interestingly, it was to protect Naval Facility Cape Hatteras, which was a submarine listening station that was operated out of that location between 1956 and 1982. And those groins actually started to fail within months of their installation. And even with the groins, the erosion was so significant that within 5 years, the Park Service was planning to move the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. So while certainly beach nourishment buys some time and the groins may help slow erosion and make the beach nourishment projects last longer, it's not going to stop erosion in these areas. I do want to really compliment Dare County for all the work they've done to assist with beach nourishment in Buxton. As Barton mentioned, in 2017, they invested over $20 million and nourished the beach with, I think, about more than 2.5 million cubic yards of sand from a borrow source just offshore. And within a matter of months of that project occurring after some storms, the ocean was still washing across the highway. They redid the beach nourishment project again in 2022, and within a year, we had structures that no longer had dunes in front of them, and the same structures we're talking about today. So while clearly those projects can buy time, they're not necessarily going to create a long-term solution without very frequent reapplication, especially in the rapidly eroding locations, at least based on what we've seen in Buxton.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left today, so we're going to start to wrap up. I want to thank our panelists for being here today and for our presenters sharing a lot of very complex information in a very short amount of time. I want to thank all of our attendees online and in person. I know 2 hours is a really long meeting to sit through, and so thank you so much for your attention today. We did not get to all the questions, so what we've done is we've created this QR code, or we also have tinyurl.com/dareco-questions. If you'd like to submit your questions there, along with your contact information, we'll work with Barton and his team at Dare County to follow up with you and get you the answers that you need. So folks that submitted questions in the chat, I encourage you to resubmit them in the form so that we have your contact information and we can follow up with you. I also want to make sure that for those in the room and on your agenda, there is, again, another QR code along with a shortened link to the voluntary interest form. We highly encourage you to fill out this form. It takes 5 minutes. All it does is gives your contact information to Barton and his team, and it is a first step to for you to explore what your options might be to get external funding. And so this, as Barton has said over and over, this does not commit you to anything. You can move along in the process and say FEMA and North Carolina Emergency Management are able to bring some additional funds into the county. You have all the way up until, if you decide to have your parcel acquired by Dare County, you have all the way up until closing to back out. And so we encourage you just to put your foot in the door, learn more about it. Dare County is here to help you, and we're here to support them. And finally, I want to end on a note of sensitivity. We talked a lot about this today, and I know we have many homeowners here in the room and online, and you know, I can't even put myself in your place. Losing my home like that with no options available to me just sounds unbelievably heartbreaking. So I'm really sorry for the situation that you're in. I know that we don't have any good answers for you right now, but our thoughts are with you, and we are trying to figure out how we can help folks, no matter what that option might be. And so we're here for you. Please reach out to us. We want to help in any way that we can. And I guess with that, we'll close out today's meeting. Thank you so much.